Welcome to Life Stories, where every story holds a lesson. Today's tale is one of kindness, betrayal, and love, a story of how one woman's selflessness changes everything. Grace, a young employee, finds herself caught in a web of cruelty and privilege when she helps an elderly woman in need. Little does she know, this act of kindness will lead her to uncover deep truths about love, character, and the people around her. Join us as we explore how one decision can alter the course of a life forever. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to start today's story. It was a chilly morning in Chicago when Grace, a young woman in her early 20s, stepped out of her modest apartment. The air was thick with the promise of rain, and dark clouds loomed in the sky. She held her umbrella tightly as she walked briskly down the wet sidewalks, careful not to slip on the slick streets. Grace had just started her new job 2 days ago, and she was determined to make a good impression. She had been searching for work for so long, and now that she had finally found something, she was ready to give it her all. Being on time was important, and she couldn't afford to be late. The world around her seemed to be moving quickly, everyone rushing to get out of the cold rain. But as Grace hurried along, her eyes fell on something that stopped her in her tracks. An elderly woman, standing by the corner of the street, appeared to be lost. She was shivering, her clothes soaked through, her feet bare. The woman had no umbrella, no coat, nothing to shield her from the harsh weather. She was just standing there, staring into the rain, as if she didn't know where to go or what to do next. Grace's heart ached when she saw the woman, and without thinking twice, she approached her. The woman looked up at Grace with tired, sorrowful eyes, and for a moment, they just stared at each other in silence. Grace took a deep breath before speaking. "Ma'am," she said softly, "take this. You'll get sick standing out here like this." Grace held out her umbrella to the elderly woman, who seemed to hesitate for a moment before accepting it. The woman's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the umbrella, but her eyes softened with gratitude. "I'm sorry," the elderly woman whispered, her voice barely audible. "I have nowhere to go. I just came from the village. I don't know anyone here." Grace's heart sank even deeper. She couldn't imagine what it must feel like to be so alone and vulnerable in a big city, especially in such cold and miserable weather. Without a second thought, Grace reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the little money she had. It wasn't much, just a few bills for the day, but it was all she had. "Here," Grace said gently, offering the money to the woman. "Take this and find somewhere warm to stay. You don't need to be out here in the rain." But the elderly woman shook her head slowly. No, I cannot take your money. My child, you need it for yourself." Grace paused for a moment, thinking, she couldn't leave the woman alone. Not like this. A sense of responsibility washed over her, and she smiled. "Come with me," she said. "I'm going to work. You can stay with me until you find your way." The elderly woman's eyes filled with tears, and she whispered, "May the gods bless you, my daughter." Grace gently held her hand, and together, they walked under the umbrella. The sound of their footsteps echoed on the wet pavement as the rain continued to fall around them. Grace's mind was racing. She knew that her workplace wasn't the most ideal place to bring a stranger. But she couldn't let this woman wander alone. She just couldn't. There was something about her vulnerability, her quiet sadness, that made Grace feel as though she needed to help her. When they reached the office building, Grace led the elderly woman inside. She found a small corner by the windows for her to sit, away from the hustle and bustle of the office. She gave the woman a cup of water and helped her dry her clothes the best she could. "Don't worry," Grace reassured her. "I only have a few hours left before break time. After that, I'll take you home before I come back to work." The woman smiled faintly and nodded, grateful for Grace's kindness. As Grace went about her work, she couldn't help but notice how the woman sat quietly, observing her with a look of admiration. She seemed so humble, so content despite having so little. Grace couldn't help but think how few people in this world were as selfless as the elderly woman. A few hours later, during her lunch break, Grace dashed out of the office. determined to get food for both herself and the elderly woman. She didn't have much money, but she wanted to make sure the woman was well taken care of. The rain had stopped, and the sun had begun to peek through the clouds, casting a soft golden glow over the city. As she hurried to the nearest shop, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that she was doing something good. Helping someone else, even in such small ways, made her feel connected to something larger, something meaningful. Meanwhile, back at the office, Emily, the fiancée of the CEO, walked in with her usual air of superiority. She was used to being admired and having things go her way. Today, she had come to surprise Ethan, the CEO. As she entered the office, she noticed the elderly woman sitting quietly in the corner, still folding her hands in her lap. Her gaze lowered. Emily looked at her with disgust. "Who brought this dirty, poor beggar here?" she demanded loudly, making sure everyone in the office could hear. The elderly woman slowly looked up, her tired eyes filled with confusion and sadness. "My child," she said softly, "please don't be angry. I will leave now." But Emily wasn't having any of it. She crossed her arms, looking down at the woman with disdain. "You better leave, or I'll have you thrown out. This is my fiancé's company, and we don't need people like you around here." The elderly woman sighed deeply, shaking her head. "You have a bad character, my daughter. I wonder what kind of man would take you as his wife." Those words struck a chord with Emily, but she simply scoffed, turning away as if the woman didn't even deserve her time. "Just leave, and don't ever come back." With great effort, the elderly woman stood up, her frail body trembling, and walked toward the door, her heart heavy with sadness and disappointment. She didn't argue or fight back, she just left. The tears she had been holding back finally began to fall, but she didn't let anyone see them. Grace returned to the office after her break, eager to share the meal she had bought for the elderly woman, whom she had started to think of as Evelyn. She couldn't wait to see how Evelyn was doing, how she was feeling after her clothes had dried, and how she was adjusting to being in the office. But as she stepped into the building, something felt off. There was a strange tension in the air. Her coworkers, who usually greeted her with smiles, avoided her gaze, and whispers filled the room. When Grace walked into the office, she found Evelyn standing near the entrance, looking out of place and a bit lost. The elderly woman was clearly uncomfortable, her posture slouched with defeat. Grace rushed to her side, offering a reassuring smile. But before Grace could speak, Chloe, the CEO's fiancée, walked in with her usual air of arrogance. Her heels clicked against the floor as she approached, and Grace could feel the change in the atmosphere the moment she entered. Chloe looked at Evelyn with disdain, her eyes narrowing as if she had seen a pest rather than a human being. Chloe didn't waste a second. She marched straight up to Evelyn and, without even acknowledging Grace, demanded, "Who brought this filthy, poor beggar into the office?" Her voice was loud and full of contempt, echoing through the room. Evelyn, already feeling out of place, looked up at Chloe, confusion and sadness written all over her face. "My child," she said softly, "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I will leave now." But Chloe wasn't done. She crossed her arms, a smirk playing on her lips. "You should have known better than to come here. This is my fiancé's company, and people like you are not welcome." She sneered, making sure that everyone in the office could hear her words, humiliating Evelyn in front of them. Grace's blood ran cold. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. How could someone treat another human being with such cruelty? She had to do something. "I'm sorry, but that's not how we treat people here," Grace said, her voice shaking with anger as she stepped forward. She wasn't going to stand by and let Chloe get away with this. Chloe turned to face Grace, raising an eyebrow as if she was looking at an insect. "Oh, the little worker has something to say. What is it, Grace? You want to defend the beggar?" Chloe's tone was dripping with mockery. Grace's hands clenched into fists. "This woman, Evelyn, has done nothing wrong. She came here in need, and you treated her like trash. You should be ashamed of yourself." But Chloe didn't care about Grace's words. She was too used to getting what she wanted, to being untouchable in her world of privilege. You don't have the right to tell me what to do. I'm going to be the boss's wife. And I'll make the rules. She sneered, then turned on her heels, dismissing Grace's words as if they meant nothing. It was then that Grace realized how futile it was to argue with someone like Chloe. Chloe was entitled, cruel, and arrogant, and she had no respect for people like Evelyn. Or for Grace. At that moment, Grace knew she couldn't let this go. She had to confront Chloe again. But this time, she wasn't backing down. She turned to Evelyn, who was now sitting in the corner, her hands folded in her lap. Evelyn looked so small, so fragile, and Grace could see the hurt in her eyes. I'll be back soon, Grace promised Evelyn, trying to reassure her with a soft smile. Though she was seething with anger, she walked straight to Chloe's office, her heart racing in her chest. When she stepped inside, Chloe was sitting at her desk, looking at her phone, completely unconcerned. Grace's voice was firm, determined. Chloe, she said, how dare you treat Evelyn like that? She didn't deserve it, and neither did I. Chloe didn't even look up. Oh, you're back. What is it this time? Grace? She asked, clearly annoyed that Grace was even bothering her. I won't stand by and let you insult my mother, Grace said through clenched teeth. Chloe smirked. Your mother? You really think you're in a position to lecture me? You little nobody? My fiancé should never have hired someone like you. But whatever, I don't need to listen to you. Grace's anger boiled over. How could you treat a helpless old woman like that? What gives you the right to belittle someone just because they don't have money or status? You don't know anything about compassion. Chloe laughed mockingly, her eyes narrowing as she glared at Grace. Please, you think that old beggar has any right to stay here? This is my fiancé's company. And if you think you're going to make me feel guilty, you're wrong. Grace took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, but it was hard. It was hard to stay composed when everything inside her was telling her to fight back. You don't even know if my boss will marry you, Grace said quietly, her voice cutting through the tension. You think you're so special. But look at you. You're full of yourself. You think money and status make a good wife. But they don't. A good wife is kind, respectful, and loving. Grace stopped herself before she said too much. Chloe's face darkened, her eyes flashing with anger. What did you just say? Grace stepped closer, her voice stronger now. I wonder how you'll treat your future mother-in-law. Chloe, I don't think she will be happy with the way you behave. Chloe's face contorted with rage. You poor little worker, she sneered. You have no idea what you're talking about. You'll regret this. I don't care, Grace said firmly. I don't need to work in a place where people like you exist. You insulted my mother, no, my friend, and now you think you can threaten me? Do your worst. Chloe, I'm leaving. With that, Grace stormed out of Chloe's office. Her heart was pounding in her chest. But she didn't care. She had stood up for what was right. When she returned to the waiting room, Evelyn was still there, looking lost and sad. Grace walked over to her, her heart sinking when she saw how the elderly woman had been affected by Chloe's cruelty. What happened? Grace asked gently. Evelyn sighed heavily. My child, she said softly, please don't be angry. A woman came in, and she told me to leave. She said I was dirty and poor, and that I didn't belong here. Grace's blood boiled at the thought of what Chloe had done. She clenched her fists, her voice shaking with fury. Who dared to do this to you? Evelyn hesitated, then whispered. She said she's the CEO's wife-to-be. Her name is Chloe. At that moment, everything inside Grace snapped. Her blood boiled with anger. And she knew she had to confront Chloe once again. But this time, she wasn't leaving without making things right. Grace stormed back into the office, her anger making her heart race. How could Chloe treat an elderly woman, someone in need, like that? The injustice of it all fueled her determination. And she knew that she couldn't let it slide. She was about to confront Chloe once again. But this time, she was done holding back. As Grace walked toward the office, her mind raced with thoughts of what she would say. How she would make Chloe understand the cruelty she had inflicted. But when she reached Chloe's office, she paused for a moment. Chloe was sitting at her desk, her back turned, flipping through a magazine. Grace took a deep breath before stepping inside, her resolve clear. "Chloe," Grace said, her voice steady but fierce. Chloe turned around, the faintest smirk on her lips as she saw Grace standing there. "Oh, it's you again," Chloe said, her voice dripping with disdain. "What is it now? I told you before, I don't have time for this." Grace's eyes narrowed. "You have no idea how wrong you are. I'm not going to stand here and let you continue insulting my friend. Let alone treat her like she's nothing. I won't tolerate it." Chloe's expression faltered for a brief second, but she quickly regained her smug composure. "Your friend?" She laughed bitterly. "That beggar was your friend?" Grace's heart pounded in her chest. But she didn't back down. "Yes, she is. And you have no right to treat anyone the way you treated her. You're so full of yourself, thinking that money and status make you better than anyone else. But that's not how life works." Chloe scoffed. "Oh, here we go with the lectures. You think I'm going to listen to some low-level employee lecture me about my future? I'm about to be the wife of the CEO. And you're nobody." Grace clenched her fists. "You don't even know if Ethan will marry you," she said quietly, her voice cutting through Chloe's arrogance like a knife. "You think you're so special. But look at you. You're arrogant, cruel, and entitled. You think that's what makes a good wife?" Chloe's face turned red with anger. "How dare you talk to me like that?" she shouted, standing up from her chair. "You think you can get away with this because you helped that old woman? You're nothing but a poor worker. And you'll never be more than that." Grace took a step forward, her eyes locked onto Chloe's. "A good wife is kind, respectful, and loving. But you, Chloe, you are none of those things. You'll never understand what true love is. Because you only care about money and status." Chloe's eyes widened in fury. "You don't know anything about me. You're just jealous because you'll never have what I have. You think Ethan would ever marry someone like you?" she spat. Grace took a deep breath, trying to calm the fire raging inside her. "You're wrong, Chloe. You think beauty and wealth are what matter. But when it comes down to it, love is about more than that. It's about kindness, understanding, and respect." Chloe laughed bitterly, crossing her arms. "You're delusional. You don't stand a chance with Ethan." Grace shook her head, her heart heavy with disappointment. "If Ethan can't see through your selfishness, then he's not the man I thought he was. But I know one thing for sure. I won't work in a place where people like you exist. You disrespected my friend, you insulted her, and now you think you can threaten me?" With that, Grace turned and stormed out of the office, the door slamming behind her. She didn't look back. She had made her stand. And nothing Chloe said or did could change that. As she walked back to where Evelyn was waiting, Grace could feel her heart still pounding with anger, but also with a sense of relief. She had done what was right. And that was what mattered most. Evelyn's face lit up when she saw Grace, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "What happened?" Evelyn asked, her voice soft. Grace's shoulders slumped as she walked over to the elderly woman. "I did what I could, Evelyn, but I think we both know what kind of person Chloe is." Evelyn smiled gently, her eyes filled with warmth. "My child, I'm so proud of you. You stood up for what's right. And that takes courage." Grace took a deep breath, her anger still simmering but slowly fading into a sense of calm. "I just couldn't let her get away with it. I couldn't let her treat you that way." Evelyn reached out and took Grace's hand in hers. "You're a good person, Grace. You have a kind heart. And that's something money and status can't buy." Grace smiled, grateful for Evelyn's words. She had done what she felt was right. But it wasn't about the confrontation. It was about standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. And for showing kindness when the world seemed so full of cruelty. Later that day, when Grace was about to leave for the evening, she received a call from the CEO's office. The voice on the other end of the line was familiar, and it made her stomach churn. It was Ethan. As Grace stood there in the quiet of the office, the phone call from Ethan lingered in the air. She felt a strange mix of anticipation and anxiety, unsure of what would come next. But as the conversation unfolded, everything changed. Ethan expressed his regret over how things had unfolded with Chloe and apologized for allowing his fiancée's actions to go unchecked. He admitted that he had been blinded by Chloe's manipulative charm and that, after everything, he saw Grace's true character and admired her strength. He offered her a new role, one that was more than she had ever expected, a personal assistant to him. With a salary and responsibilities beyond her wildest dreams, Grace was taken aback, unsure of what to say. But as the words settled in, she realized that it wasn't just about the job. It was about the respect Ethan had for her as a person. Not just an employee. He understood her value beyond appearances or status. Over the next few weeks, Grace settled into her new role. But what mattered most was the newfound respect between her and Ethan. They grew closer, their shared values and mutual respect for one another strengthening their bond. In the end, it wasn't the wealth, the office, or the title that mattered, it was the kindness and integrity they both shared. And as for Chloe, well, she was gone. Ethan realized that someone who would treat others with such cruelty wasn't the person he wanted by his side. He had learned a powerful lesson about the true nature of love and respect. Grace and Ethan eventually married. Their wedding a celebration of love, kindness, and the lessons learned from life. Together, they knew they had found something real. Something that would last. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to stay updated on new life stories.